As always, joined by my good friend and colleague, Sam Silverstein. Sam, welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Tom. It's always great getting together and having these conversations around culture and how culture impacts organizational behavior, organizational results, and ultimately whether or not people are really going to stick with that organization.
Turns out Sam has been working on a survey where he looks at ethics, culture, and unfortunately, the divide between poor performing companies and better performing companies. And we're going to use that survey and some of Sam's findings as a starting point for our discussion today. We've got a fairly small group, so I hope we can really have a robust discussion with lots of Q&As. So let me see if I can forward the slides.
And be sure and raise your hand if you have a question. You want to ask a question, we can go deeper. You can also put it in chat. What we're going to be talking about today is based on the preliminary data from a national survey that we did. We surveyed over 1,000 people with a variety of demographics, both from geography, age group, organization size, and so a very diverse group. And this is just a small piece, Tom, of the data that we're processing. And we're going to have the whole report, and certainly that's going to be something that's going to be well worth one or more webinars. But I love the idea that today we're just really keyed in on this one little slice of the connection between culture and ethics.
Well, Sam, when we first started discussions about having this event today, you really emphasized or drove home the point to me about the divide. So maybe we could start with setting the stage of what is this divide and why did you find it, frankly, so disconcerting? But what are some of the lessons that perhaps we can learn from it throughout this podcast? So let's start with what's the divide?
Well, the divide is simply this: we see a distinct difference in how ethics is or isn't showing up in an organization based on the quality of the culture. And so, one of the things that we asked to the respondents to this survey was, how would you rate your culture? Is it a good culture? Is it a bad culture? We had them rated on a scale of 1 to 10. We said 8 to 10 was good. We said, I believe it was 5 or less was bad. And then 6 and 7 is in the abyss. Now, Tom, between you and me, the gray area is usually a negative as well. If it's not good, it's bad. And so what we came away with was noticing how ethics shows up in a much, much more desirable way in these good culture organizations. But the cultures with weak organizations, ethics isn't showing up, and not to the degree. And there's problems in all organizations, don't get me wrong, but we see a significant difference. And the lack of ethics in an organization is going to undermine its performance over the long haul, without a doubt.
So with that, let's just go into. Okay, let's define the culture ethics connection. Could you start with that, Sam? And why do you think culture has such a strong impact on ethics?
Well, here's what we find about culture. Organizations that master relationship, master accountability, and create a very positive culture. If you have an organization that has a good culture going, that people enjoy being a part of, they feel valued, there's always a very strong foundation of relational connection between people. In the organizations where the culture is lacking, where it's coming up on the lower end of the scale, there's definitely a divide in the sense of a lack of relationships. The reality is we're only going to be accountable to people we like. If you don't like someone, you're not going to be accountable to them or for them as a leader. And that creates a problem. And so what happens is people start taking shortcuts in these cultures that are poor cultures. It becomes a numbers thing. It's about all that matters is productivity, and it doesn't matter what you do to get there many times, which means ethics goes out the window. as you know, Tom, you're the expert on this. It's poor ethical decisions can paint a better picture on the bottom line today, but it can't long term. And so a poor ethical decision is always a short term decision, and it's always a bad decision for the organization and for the people that are part of that organization. So there is this definite connection to culture. The quality of culture matters.
Sam, I was interviewed this morning and someone asked me the difference between accountability and responsibility. And I said, not only did I give them the answer, but I'm going to save that question for my friend, Sam Silverstein. You've used accountability twice already. So could you just remind our audience the difference between those two terms?
Great. I love that question. You're accountable to people, but you're responsible for things. You're accountable to people, you're responsible for things. So tasks are responsibility. Your job description is a list of responsibilities. Accountability exists between human beings, between individuals, you and me, in this group. We have this group on the webinar. There could be accountable relationships involved there. And so that's really the key. Without relationship, you don't have accountability. Now, we need responsibility. We need to get things done. We need productivity. That's important. But that's not accountability. That's responsibility. And accountability is a good thing. It's not about holding people accountable. It's about, as leaders, being accountable to people and being accountable for them. There's a difference. And when that's in play, then you have these stronger relationships, and you have organizational cultures that are far more positive. And we want to make ethical decisions, because I realize I'm in this with you, Tom. My decision impacts you, and you know your decisions impact me.
Sam, I'd like to take the final two bullet points on this slide together really into one question. It's a little bit disconcerting to find that even with good cultures, there's still a report of over 25% or 1/4 of employees feel pressure to compromise value. But I want to pair that with the leader's role in setting an ethical tone for a culture. You've been a CEO and president of a business. How do you set that tone so that employees feel comfortable or safe, not to feel pressure to compromise values?
That's powerful. And, there's an old parenting adage, do as I say, not as I do. It doesn't work as a parent, and it doesn't work as a leader. Everything flows from the top. It's all eyes are on leadership, always. And so the bandwidth, that the leader has a much more narrow track that they must stay in. They can't make decisions that don't align with the values, because if they do, everyone sees it, and then that's giving license to everyone to do the same. So you can create a good culture, but if the leader is slipping up, if the leader is allowing some things to go on in the culture that shouldn't be going on, you might have an 8 culture, you might have a 9, you certainly don't have a 10. It's still a good culture, but the ethics aren't where they should be. And I think this shows us how, even in a positive environment, there are people that feel like it's okay to cut a corner. And I think that's connected to justification. And so we start justifying things in order to supposedly live the values, but actually we're going against the values when we do that. And so this to me is an aha moment. This is something that, as leaders, we need to know. We can have an amazing culture, but we still have to drive the initiative on ethics, on creating the highest possible platform for ethical behavior in our organization. It's a conversation that can never stop, Tom.
And that's really one of the points I wanted to try to emphasize, that and another point. The conversation can never stop, that you have to continually reinforce that. And that really is the role of the leader, whether they see themselves as the ambassador, whether they see themselves as some other figure or some other description. They can always talk about that. They can talk about that individually with employees. They can talk about that in meetings. They can talk about that in town halls. But Sam, I also wanted to use these last two to also emphasize the importance that you need to continually assess, or at least more than annually assess where you are on this point, because if you begin to see a trend in the wrong direction, then you want to step your game up. So could you say a few words about that topic?
Well, that's key because here's another thing that we discovered. And this is something that we've discovered anecdotally because we do have the culture audit, which we use to measure the quality of a culture in an organization. We use to measure the presence, the level of accountability within an organization. And we measure 15 indices and really it tells us exactly what's going on. And without fail, most leaders that we see will feel that their culture is better than it actually is. And so that's the paradox. It's like, yeah, we've got a great culture. Okay. But when we go through and we do the culture audit time, we find out many times they might have a pretty good culture, but there's some holes. There's some things that aren't going right. And almost it's inevitable that the leaders are surprised with the results that we bring back to them, which tells me that most leaders don't, most, not all, but most don't have a full handle of understanding exactly where their culture is. And if you don't have a full handle and understanding of exactly where your culture is, I guarantee you don't have a full handle and understanding of how ethics is being played out within the organization.
All right, we're going to move to our next slide. The pressure to compromise. And this is something we touched on in the prior slide, Sam, but it's a pretty dramatic number in poor cultures. What were some of the situations that you and your team uncovered where employees feel pressured to compromise their values? And can those situations you uncovered either be remediated or even fixed?
Can they be remediated or fixed? Wow. I'm working backwards here. The only fix is if this is senior leader is willing to change. If the senior leader is not willing to change, it's not going to be fixed. The senior leader is the one that allows this to go on within the organization. You can point fingers all you want, but you can say, well, mid-level leadership's messing up. Well, maybe that's where the problems are presenting themselves, but the senior leaders hired those people, authorized the hiring, authorized or allowed them to stay, are not insisting on a certain level of living of the values and of ethical decision implementation. It always comes back to leadership. So whether or not can it be fixed? You bet it can be fixed. But senior leadership is where the problem is and where the problem has to be fixed. Now, the senior leader, if you're a senior leader that's watching this, I'm not saying you're a problem, but I'm saying you may unknowingly be allowing a problem to persist. And this is why we do the culture audit. This is why we work with senior leaders, is to have that understanding and to empower you. If someone in your organization is not living the values and you allow them to stay for any reason, then you can no longer say those values are yours. If someone in the organization is making unethical decisions and you allow them to stay, then you cannot say that this is an organization that makes ethical decisions or is based on ethical decisions. And so it's about an awareness and understanding that as leaders, we have to step up and we have to get out of the gray. It needs to be a black and white situation. So, I think that in the stronger cultures are based on valuing people, and then the people perform at a high level. The weaker cultures are meritocracies where it's about where they don't understand what accountability is. And in essence, they're trying to manipulate people to do more for them. I'm going to hold you accountable. That's what that sounds like. Nobody wants to be held accountable. It's like putting a gun to their head. And so it's those organizations where, I am fearful for my job. I am fearful for the paycheck that I need to put food on the table for my family and loved ones. And I'll do anything to make sure that I'm not fired. And that's when ethics goes out the window.
Could you maybe detail a couple of the situations that you found or heard about through your survey, Sam?
We've seen we've seen organizations, and we didn't, in the survey, we didn't ask for specific examples. No one shared specific examples. But companies that we've worked with, we've seen where people close down and they stop communicating with each other. And there's a pressure from above that's focused on the results, the bottom line, rather than senior leadership focusing on the people. Ultimately, senior leadership takes on the responsibility. They're accountable for the success and the safety of their people. Success, and now we see senior leaders go, well, I pay them to do that. No, yes, you pay them, but as a senior leader, you're responsible. You're accountable for them, not just to them. And this is a stewardship relationship. And so when senior leaders start stepping up to that responsibility and they accept that accountability, then what happens is they see their people differently, they treat them differently, and they get a different result. So we had a client that we were working with that just didn't know how to communicate with the people properly. And the way they communicated, it came across where everything was about the bottom line, the bottom line, the bottom line. And when they changed their focus to the people, making sure that the people were taken care of, the people had the resources, the people were positioned for success, the people could live their lives and deal with the personal challenges that they had, and that the people's lives came before the organization, everything in that organization changed. But it started with the leader accepting the fact that if he's just focused on the bottom line, and it was a he in this situation, then the people are just pushing numbers, and it's not going to work.
So what are some of the unintentional signals that a company might send? I certainly understand intentional, but what are some of the unintentional signals that you've seen or came up in the survey, Sam?
Well, it's not so much that these signals came up in the survey, but these signals come up every time that we're with a client. And it's like this. You walk into the airport, and you're kind of tight on connection time, and you need some information about a flight, and you go up to the counter, and there's someone there, and maybe it's at the gate or maybe it's out front. It doesn't really matter. And you just blurt your question out. Can you tell me what time, how late is flight 3765 to Omaha? Well, okay, you need to know. But you know what? You're talking to a human being. That human being is having a day, just like you're having a day. And you have a choice in that moment. You can walk up, no matter how much of a hurry you're in, you can walk up and you can say, hi, how's your day going? And they'll say, you know what? It's okay, or it's been tough, or whatever. And you go, I hear you. Quick question, if you don't mind. What's the story on the flight to Omaha? Now, it takes 5 seconds to interject that little care that you're interested in them and what's going on in their life. And the fact that you care about them makes an indelible impression on them, and you will get far better service. And I'm not saying to do this as a manipulative process, but to actually care about people. Well, 5 seconds is not going to be the difference between making and missing a flight. And if it is, you know what? That's the investment you need to make. If you're running that tight, that's on you, not on them. Well, it's the same way in a business. And we see this. When your people know, when the people you lead know you care about them, then they care about the organization and they care about you. And that change in relationship changes what's going to happen. So the unintentional is the focus on the bottom line, the focus on the process, the focus on the task at hand, the focus on the mission, the focus on the objective. We need to be intentional about focusing on the people and their well-being and their lives and what's going on in their world. And the leader who says this isn't personal, it's business, is missing the whole thing, Tom, because every interaction between two human beings is very personal, even when you're discussing business.